The moment Derek Calloway walked into the conference room and set his laptop down at the head of the table, my chair, the one I'd sat in for 11 years of quarterly reviews, I knew exactly how this was going to go. He didn't introduce himself to me. He shook hands with the CFO, nodded at the two VPs flanking her, and then looked straight through me like I was a coat rack someone had forgotten to move. I was sitting 3 feet away. 28 years with Meridian Federal Savings. My name was on the original compliance architecture that kept this bank out of 3 federal investigations. And this 34-year-old with a Wharton MBA and a $6,000 watch couldn't find it in himself to extend a hand. I picked up my coffee. I didn't say a word. That was a Thursday in February. By the following Monday, I had a pretty clear picture of what Derek had been hired to do, and it wasn't to preserve anything I'd built. My name is Marcus Webb. I spent 28 years as the head of IT infrastructure and regulatory compliance at Meridian Federal Savings Bank in Columbus, Ohio. Not a glamorous title, not the kind of job people ask about at dinner parties, but Meridian was a federally chartered institution with $4.2 billion in assets, and the systems I built were the reason we'd never once failed a Federal Reserve examination. Not in 28 years. Not once. I started at Meridian when I was 33, fresh out of a government contracting role, where I'd spent 6 years learning how federal regulators actually thought, not how the textbooks said they thought, but how the examiners themselves, the ones who showed up with clipboards and cold eyes, actually processed what they saw. I brought that knowledge to Meridian when the bank was still running paper-based compliance logs. I digitized everything. I built the transaction reconciliation architecture from the ground up. I wrote the internal protocols that map directly to Federal Reserve Regulation H requirements, and then I updated them every single time the Fed issued new guidance. Every time. Without being asked, what that meant, in practical terms, was that when a Fed examiner walked into Meridian, I could put a binder in front of them within 4 minutes that answered every question they were about to ask. Other banks spent weeks preparing for examinations. We didn't. We were always ready, because I built the system so that being ready was the default state. That was my value to Meridian. It wasn't glamorous. Nobody wrote articles about it, but it was the reason Meridian had a pristine examination record, while 2 of our regional competitors had paid a combined $90 million in penalties over the same period. Derek Calloway didn't know any of that when he walked into that conference room. More to the point, he didn't think he needed to. I learned what Derek had been hired to do from Carol, who ran the executive assistant pool and had been with Meridian almost as long as I had. Derek had been brought in by the new board chairman, a private equity guy named Forsyth, who'd taken a significant stake in Meridian 8 months earlier. Forsyth wanted the bank modernized. What that meant, in PE language, was that he wanted costs cut and the balance sheet prettied up for an eventual sale or merger. Derek was the instrument of that vision. His mandate was digital transformation, which, translated out of consultant speak, meant replace expensive experienced people with cheaper automated systems and offshore vendors. Reduce headcount by at least 22% and make the numbers look good fast. Within his first 2 weeks, Derek had scheduled what he called operational efficiency reviews with every department head. I had mine on a Wednesday afternoon. He came in with a junior analyst named Priya, who was maybe 26 and was busy taking notes on an iPad the whole time. Derek asked me to walk him through my department's cost structure. I did. He asked me to explain why we maintained what he called redundant manual verification layers in our compliance workflow. I explained carefully and in plain language that those layers existed because Federal Reserve examiners specifically looked for them as evidence of adequate internal controls, and that removing them would be flagged in our next examination. He nodded and typed something into his laptop. Then he asked me how long it would take to migrate our compliance monitoring to an automated SaaS platform. I put my coffee down. I told him that Meridian's compliance architecture wasn't a standard commercial banking setup. I told him that we had specific examination history, specific documentation conventions, and specific cross-references to Fed guidance letters that had been accumulated over nearly 3 decades, and that any SaaS platform would require at minimum 18 months of customization and parallel testing before it could be trusted in a live examination environment. I told him that the Federal Reserve's examination team for our district had been consistent for years, that they knew our documentation system, and that changing it without adequate notice and a formal transition period was a material risk. He nodded again. Then he asked Priya to note that the current system was heavily personalized and potentially non-transferable. I understood exactly what that phrase meant. I'd heard that language before, in a different industry, used about a different person. It meant, the problem isn't the system, it's the person. Make them redundant, and the system becomes a problem you can justify replacing. I drove home that night and sat in my kitchen for a long time. I was 61 years old. My daughter was finishing her second year of residency in Pittsburgh. My house was paid off. My retirement accounts were in good shape. I didn't need Meridian the way I might have needed them 10 years ago. What I had invested in Meridian, at this point, wasn't financial. It was something harder to name. 28 years of showing up, of caring about the work, of treating a federally regulated institution's examination record like it was something worth protecting, that doesn't just live in a server somewhere. It lives in decisions made over years, in relationships built with regulators, in documentation systems that are only intuitive if you understand the reasoning that built them. Derek Calloway was going to find that out. I just didn't know yet how I was going to let that happen. 3 weeks after our meeting, I got the email. It came from HR on a Tuesday morning, CC'd to Derek and to the CFO. Position elimination, effective in 60 days. My role was being consolidated into the new digital transformation and compliance automation function. There was a severance package attached. It was reasonable, I'll give them that. I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop and went for a walk around the building. When I came back, there was a meeting invitation waiting from Derek. Could I meet that afternoon to discuss knowledge transfer timelines? I accepted. He was already in the conference room when I arrived, along with Priya and a man I didn't recognize who turned out to be the implementation director from the SaaS compliance platform Derek had apparently already contracted with. His name was Jason. He was enthusiastic in the way that salespeople are enthusiastic about problems that aren't theirs to solve. Derek explained that Meridian would be transitioning to the new platform over the next 90 days. He wanted me to document everything, all processes, all custom configurations, all examination-specific workflows. I nodded. Then I said, very calmly, I want to make sure we're aligned on the examination schedule. Our next Federal Reserve examination is the second week of September. Derek glanced at Priya. That's about 7 months out. That's plenty of runway. I said, it's typically a 14-day examination window, and our examiners have historically requested documentation in a specific format tied to our internal reference system. If the platform migration isn't complete and stable well before then, with full parallel testing, I'd recommend flagging that as a risk to the board. Derek said, I appreciate the input, Marcus. We'll manage the timeline. That was the last substantive conversation I had with Derek Calloway. Over the next 6 weeks, I did exactly what I'd been asked to do. I documented everything. Every process, every workflow, every decision tree. I was meticulous, professional. I answered every question Priya sent me. I sat through 3 sessions with Jason from the SaaS company and watched him nod with increasing confidence as I explained systems whose complexity I could tell he didn't fully appreciate. What I didn't do was explain the one thing nobody had thought to ask me about. Buried in Meridian's master service agreement with the Federal Reserve, not the standard boilerplate, but an addendum negotiated in 2009 during a specific examination. Remediation was a clause that required Meridian to maintain a designated regulatory liaison technical contact, whose identity and direct contact information was registered with the Fed's District Examination Office. This person had to have a minimum tenure of 5 years with the institution and had to be individually certified under a specific internal protocol that had been established as part of the 2009 remediation agreement. That person was me. Not my title, not my department. Me, specifically, by name, as updated in the Fed's registration system each year when I renewed the certification. The clause further specified that, in the event the designated contact was no longer with the institution, Meridian was required to notify the Fed's examination office no fewer than 90 days in advance, provide the credentials and background of a successor contact, and have that successor approved before the existing contact's departure took effect. Nobody at Meridian had looked at that addendum in years. It had been drafted during a period of tension with the Fed that most current executives had no memory of. It lived in a folder in our legal archives and was referenced in the Master Compliance Index, under a document code that was intuitive, only if you knew the indexing convention I'd built in 2011. I had never hidden it. I had referenced it in 3 internal compliance reports over the past decade. But those reports were dense and technical, and nobody had flagged the clause because as long as I was there, the clause was automatically satisfied. As of my termination date, it would not be. I want to be clear about something. I didn't engineer a disaster. I didn't sabotage anything. I documented everything I was asked to document. I answered every question I was asked. What I did was exactly what any reasonable person in my position would do. I documented what I was asked to document, and I did not volunteer information about a compliance requirement that nobody had asked me about, and that it was the institution's legal department's job to know. The failure, when it came, belonged entirely to Derek Calloway. My last day at Meridian was a Friday in April. The CFO stopped by my office in the morning and thanked me. She seemed genuinely uncomfortable, which I respected. She'd been with the company for 12 years herself and knew what was happening. A few colleagues came by throughout the day. At 5 o'clock, I carried one box to my car, 32 years of professional credentials, 2 family photos, and a coffee mug my daughter had given me in 2019. I drove home, I made dinner, I watched a baseball game. I did not send Derek a good luck message. I did not tell anyone about the addendum. Summer passed. I did some consulting work, a regional credit union that needed help preparing for a safety and soundness examination. A community bank in Indiana, updating its BSA, AML protocols. Good work. Straightforward work. People who actually wanted my expertise and weren't embarrassed to admit they needed it. In late August, I got a call from Carol, my old colleague at Meridian. She was whispering, which told me she was calling from the office. She said Derek had just gotten a letter from the Federal Reserve's Columbus District office. The Fed's examination team was scheduled to arrive the second week of September, as planned. But in the letter, there was a secondary notice, a compliance flag. It indicated that Meredith's registered regulatory liaison technical contact had departed the institution without the required 90-day advance notification and without a certified successor being registered with the Fed's examination office. The notice required Meridian to respond within 5 business days with either a cure, meaning a certified successor, was identified and submitted for approval, or an explanation of why the requirement had not been met. Carol said Derek had called an emergency meeting. She said he looked like someone had told him the building was on fire. I thanked her and said, I hoped things went okay. Then I poured myself a glass of iced tea and sat on my back porch. The 5-day cure window was the first problem. Getting someone certified as a successor, regulatory liaison technical contact under the 2009 protocol required documented training, an internal certification process that I had designed and administered, and submission of credentials to the Fed's examination office for approval. The approval process typically took 3 to 4 weeks. There was no expedited option. The Fed's examination office did not do favors on timelines for institutions that had failed to comply with basic notification requirements, meaning there was no cure. Not in 5 days. Not by the examination date. The second problem was the examination itself. Derek's team had migrated to the new SaaS compliance platform in June. The migration had taken 11 weeks instead of the planned 6. I'd heard this from Carol, and the parallel testing period had been compressed to 3 weeks to meet the timeline. Several of the custom cross-reference protocols I'd built over the years had been simplified during migration because the SaaS platform couldn't replicate them exactly, and Jason hadn't understood why they existed. What that meant, in practical terms, was that Meridian's examination documentation was now in a format the Fed's examiners had never seen before, with reference codes that didn't map to the historical documentation they had on file, and with none of the institutional context that would make the discrepancies self-explanatory. Under normal circumstances, I would have been the person who walked the examiners through the transition. I would have explained the new system, provided the crosswalk documentation, managed the relationship. I was not there. What followed, I pieced together later from Carol and from a former colleague in the legal department who called me in October. The examination team arrived on a Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, they had issued a document request that the new compliance team couldn't fully answer in the required format. By Thursday, the lead examiner had escalated to a formal management response request, an MRR, which is the Fed's way of putting an institution on notice that the examination has identified significant concerns. The following Monday, the Fed issued a preliminary finding. The finding cited 3 things: the unresolved regulatory liaison technical contact violation, documentation deficiencies in the transaction reconciliation records, and the one that came from Derek's automation decision, the absence of adequate manual verification controls in the compliance monitoring workflow. That last finding was not minor. The Fed's guidance on internal controls is explicit. Automated monitoring systems require documented manual override and verification procedures. Derek had eliminated those procedures when he deployed the SaaS platform, because eliminating them was how he'd gotten the cost savings he'd promised Forsyth. The examiners saw the gap immediately. They'd been looking at banks' compliance systems for 30 years. They knew what adequate controls looked like, and they knew what the absence of them meant. The preliminary finding triggered a formal enforcement review. In early October, Meridian received a Memorandum of Understanding from the Federal Reserve. MOUs are not the most severe enforcement action the Fed has, but they're not minor either. This one required Meridian to address all three cited deficiencies within 120 days, submit to a follow-up examination at the institution's expense, and maintain elevated reporting requirements for 24 months. The cost projection in the legal department's internal memo, according to my former colleague, was between $60 million and $90 million when you included the remediation costs, the follow-up examination fees, the elevated capital reserve requirements the MOU triggered, and the impact on two pending acquisition discussions that the board had been quietly advancing. The acquirers both withdrew when the MOU became public. That was another consequence nobody had priced in. Forsyth, the board chairman, was reportedly furious. Not at himself, I'm sure. But the story I heard was that the board meeting in late October was not a comfortable evening for Derek Calloway. My phone rang on a Wednesday morning in November. The number was Derek's direct line. I knew it was his, it was still in my contacts, the way all the numbers from a job you held for decades stay in your contacts for years after. I looked at it ring. I thought about that February morning, the coat rack he'd looked through, the Wharton MBA, the $6,000 watch, the phrase heavily personalized and potentially non-transferable, typed into a laptop by a 26-year-old who didn't know what she was describing. I let it go to voicemail. He didn't leave one. 20 minutes later, the CFO called. I'd always respected her, but I let that one go to voicemail too. She left a message. Her voice was careful and professional, but I could hear the weight in it. She said the board wanted to discuss the possibility of a consulting engagement. She mentioned a daily rate that was more than I'd made weekly as a full-time employee. She said it would mean a great deal to the institution if I were willing to speak with them. I sat with that message for the better part of an hour. I want to tell you that I felt triumphant, that there was some rush of satisfaction, some release of everything that had built up since that February morning. But that's not what I felt. What I actually felt was something quieter and harder to name. It was the feeling of having been right about something for a long time, and finding out that being right didn't actually fix anything. 28 years, the examination record, the binders, the 2009 remediation that I'd personally overseen, that had turned a significant Fed concern into a model compliance program. All of that had been set aside by a private equity chairman and a 34-year-old MBA in about 45 days. And now, because of what that decision cost, people at Meridian Carroll, colleagues I'd worked with for decades, tellers and loan officers and support staff who had nothing to do with Derek's automation strategy, were going to spend the next 2 years under elevated regulatory scrutiny, and whatever job security they had was going to be shakier because the bank's acquirers had walked away. That was the part of the story Derek Calloway hadn't priced in either. The collateral damage. I called the CFO back the next morning. I told her I was willing to speak with the board. I told her my terms. A 12-month consulting agreement, structured as an independent contractor engagement, at the rate she'd mentioned, with a specific deliverable, a full remediation of the three cited deficiencies in the MOU, a new regulatory liaison technical contact certification program that didn't depend on any single individual, and a transition documentation package that would make Meridian's compliance architecture genuinely transferable for the first time in its history. I also told her, clearly, that I would not work with Derek Calloway as my day-to-day contact. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she thought that could be arranged. Derek resigned in January. I found out from Carol, who texted me a single word: gone. I didn't feel satisfaction about that either. Particularly, he was someone who'd been handed authority without the experience to use it well, and he'd used it badly, and the institution had paid for it. That's a story as old as organizations themselves. It doesn't require a villain to happen. It just requires a board that mistakes confidence for competence, and a room full of people who don't push back when they should. I started the consulting engagement in February, exactly 1 year after that conference room morning. The first thing I did was pull the 2009 addendum out of the legal archives and build it into the primary compliance index in a way that 3 different people would have to miss before it could slip through the cracks again. Then I spent 3 months rebuilding the documentation architecture with the new team. A different team, people who asked questions and took notes, and didn't assume they already knew the answers. The Fed's follow-up examination was scheduled for May. We were ready 6 weeks before the date. The lead examiner, a woman named Harriet Okafor, who had been examining Meridian for 14 years, walked in on a Monday morning. By Tuesday, she told the CFO that the documentation package was the cleanest remediation response she'd seen in a decade of follow-up work. I wasn't there for that. I was in my kitchen in Columbus, drinking coffee and reading a book. My phone didn't ring. It didn't need to. You spend enough years doing something right and doing it quietly, and after a while, the work itself is the only thing that tells the story. The binders in the archive, the examination record, the addendum in the index, the system that keeps running after you're gone because this time you made sure it was built to run without you. Derek Calloway never did call back after that first November morning. I don't know where he is now. Somewhere with another mandate and another board and another set of systems whose depth he probably hasn't taken the time to understand. I finished my consulting engagement in February of the following year. I shook hands with the CFO on a Friday afternoon in the same conference room where it had all started. Different chairs, same table. She thanked me. I told her she was welcome. Then I drove home. I made dinner. I watched a baseball game. Some things you build take 30 years to prove their value. Some people only find out what they had after it's gone. I spent a long time being angry about that. And then I spent a long time not being angry about it anymore. And in the end, what remained was simpler than either of those things. I knew what I'd built. I knew what it was worth. And I knew as of that November morning when Derek's number lit up my phone that eventually they would too. I just didn't need to be the one to say it.
Some days feel off. Like I'm standing but still falling. A little pain, a little tired, and no one to tell it all to. There are days that feel unsteady, like I'm drifting out of place. Every step just feels so heavy, with a smile I have to fake. A little hurt I keep inside me, a little weight I always hide, and 1,000 quiet worries I've been holding deep inside. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you. I keep walking through the silence like it's all I've ever known. Every crowded room reminds me how it feels to be alone. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you. Maybe one day I'll be stronger, maybe I'll learn how to speak, but for now I keep it buried in the parts of me too weak. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you. I'm freezing, I'm bleeding, slowly fading away. But don't worry, I'm fine. The cold has settled in my heartbeat, like winter living in my veins. Every breath feels numb and fragile. Every smile just hides the pain. I'm breaking quietly in silence, falling slow without a sound. Yet I keep saying I'm okay, while my world burns to the ground. I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry, I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. Maybe pain just learned to live here, maybe sorrow feels like home. So I wear my wounds like armor and survive them all alone. I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry, I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. If you ever see me smiling, no, it's just my last defense. 'Cause sometimes love means hiding how much you're suffering. No, I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry, I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. It's okay.